Welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. I'm your host, Rob, joined this week by Dave and producer JL, John Luke Shapiro, with us. Always a pleasure when that is the case. And we are recording on the final rest day for the New York Rangers in this fortuitously light week of hockey. I think that's the case for the fan base as well as the players and coaches of the Rangers who have had a chance to sort of maybe recuperate, reset, and hopefully have a chance now to restart their season with a game this weekend at home against the Pittsburgh Penguins on Friday night. You'll be listening to this probably on Friday morning. But on today's show, we're not so much going to delve into individual games, or do our recap or preview thing. We are going to kind of like step back and assess what's gone on over the last, 7 to 10 days. Talk about maybe some of the key issues, and then also get into some really interesting responses that Dave got after he posted something on Blue Sky. So that's kind of what this week's show looks like. Dave, start with you. How's everything going in your world? Are you glad to not have to deal with watching the Rangers this week?
This was like you said, this was a very perfectly timed 3-4 day break because, personally for me, it's been a stressful week. I got added to a couple of major projects at work. I took over a couple of major projects, I should say, and they're difficult. And then the added stress of the Rangers looking like the Islanders for the last month and a half, 2 months wasn't going to help. So I'm glad we had a break. Gives us a little bit of a reset. Hopefully it gave the Rangers a bit of a reset and they get their collective acts together because they look horrible.
Yeah, JL, how about your state of mind here as a Ranger fan with this week off? Where have you gone? Have you gone to an optimistic place or a more pessimistic place? Or you're not thinking about it at all?
Well, no, I definitely think about it because to a degree, the games do affect my mood somewhat. So it's nice to kind of get a break from that just a little bit. But at the same time, with all the stuff that's come out, you kind of just want the game to come so that maybe it can kind of maybe just push it to the side. I'm naturally optimistic, but this sucks, man. Like really, this blows.
Yeah, this is just for context, right? We've been doing this podcast in some form since just before COVID wrecked the world in January, 2020. Obviously, the pandemic started in March. We started the podcast 2 months before that. This is definitely the worst, sort of most crisis-laden stretch of covering the Rangers we've had. Now, I'm an older fan, I guess, comparatively speaking. So I have very strong and vivid memories of like the true dark ages of the late 90s, early 2000s. This is not that, but there are some, like, I would call them troubling, like echoes of that, where like you're starting to see a roster that, like, if it's not addressed, like will become sort of like bloated with too many, big contracts and players who like might not be all in. And, that is kind of how that whole thing spiraled out of control in the like latter years of Mark Messier. But that's really neither here nor there. Where I wanted to really start this week's show is, because of the time off, there's been lots of time for the media, both local and national, North America, America and Canada, nationally speaking, to kind of like get involved in the conversation about the Rangers. Now, it's kind of funny. The Rangers are the number one market. They're an original 6 team, but they're not really often covered like that. They kind of fly under the radar in a weird way. And they've been so kind of consistently good over the last few seasons that it's just like, okay, they hum along and we'll see how they do in the playoffs. And the only time you really hear about them is around the deadline, when usually their name gets inserted into conversations to drive up the price of available players. This week, there has been a lot of chatter just about why this thing has gone off the rails. Obviously, Chris Drury's quote unquote memo has made it, truly a national news story in the hockey world. But I wanted to really start with the captain of the team, because I think that's where, in many ways, this whole thing begins and ends. In several different places. One of them, the New York Post's podcast, which they post on YouTube. It's, normally Larry Brooks, Molly Walker, and Brian Boyle. They do a fantastic job. I don't love promoting a Rupert Murdoch owned publication, but I consume it on YouTube. It's free. I don't pay for Post Sports Plus, but I do try to read, Larry's coverage, even though some of it's now behind the paywall. I think Molly does a fine job as a beat writer, and the podcast is good. Larry in particular really hammered the Rangers, and it was not done in a personal way at all. It was basically like, and look, we can sort of debate, the merits of Larry's sourced reporting in recent years, but he's around the team enough to get a vibe, right? And basically his take was that the vibe is awful and that it all comes back to the captain. The way that he handled the summer, the way that they all reacted, and in Larry's words, and I agree, like quite immaturely, to the Barclay Goodrow thing, that has sort of been the through line from the summer all the way till now, which is, this team sort of like struggling and looking very mentally checked out at times. And then, similarly, Elliot Friedman went on NHL Network on Thursday to sort of give a state of play on where the Rangers are with trades. But he also mentioned the Jacob Trouba scenario and said, "Hey, look, I've checked in on what happened over the summer," essentially confirming the reports. And basically it was that Trouba has made it known that he would be very unhappy, is how kind of Friedman put it, to leave New York. And that, basically that's totally depressing any value that he might have on the open market, because nobody wants to trade for a guy who's going to be miserable if he leaves New York. So he's choosing to stay in New York, be miserable, and harm the team. And look, this is, I'm going to try and not be completely immature about this, because it's sports, and I am trying to come at it from like an empathetic lens somewhat. But frankly, guys, like, I think this is the type of thing that becomes very, very toxic in a locker room. And I think it's the type of thing that you may have to take extreme measures to take care of. Because I think if you were to eliminate Trouba from the equation, the mood of the team probably shifts. Now, they may miss him. I understand that he is a respected leader. I know that he has done historically a lot of behind the scenes stuff, whether that's like team outings and gatherings or bringing concerns to coaching and management, but it's pretty clear that he's not playing that role anymore. I mean, he could not look more disinterested when he's approached post game like he was after the Devils game. He was like, "Yeah, whatever. Oh, we'll move on." Like, just no interest, no fire there. And, look, teams take on the personality of their leading players. And right now the Rangers have taken on the personality of Trouba, and I think that's a bad thing. I'll end my rant by saying this. Like, I think if no trade agreement can be reached soon, and I mean within a week or two, to 10 days, 2 weeks max, they may have to consider waiving him. And I know there are potential cap implications there, and, can they bury him in Hartford, and what does that look like? But I think it's getting that bad. That's my hypothesis based on what we've heard in the media, which is beyond whispers at this point. It's basically like they're reporting it without actually reporting it. But enough people are saying that he's his mood is bringing this team down. So, Dave, any thoughts on that?
So, two things. I want to address the over the summer thing first before getting to current state. Over the summer, and my stance on this hasn't changed. Trouba's within his contractual right to do what he's doing. And if I were in his shoes with a new kid at home and a wife trying to finish up her career, trying to get her career going, I would do the same thing. But the report over the summer wasn't that he would be unhappy. It was that he wouldn't report. And that was just flat out wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at some point, whoever said that, whoever got that out there, I'm not throwing names out there. I think we all know who said that, though. That needs to be apologized for and retracted, because he did not say he's not going to report. He took what Drury gave him, which was, an olive branch of, "Hey, listen, we need to move you. Where do you want to go?" And use that to structure his no trade clause so that he was limited. That's on Drury. That's not on Trouba.
Yes, I
He
would
should
agree
have
with that.
waited. Drury screwed this up big time. And as much as we all want to get on Trouba, this is Drury's mess. This is a big, colossal mess up. He should have waited until the no trade list was submitted and then traded him.
Yep.
That's how that works. You don't give leverage to people, even if you're trying to treat them as humans. I know that comes off horrible with zero empathy whatsoever, but this is the business. Trouba is exercising his contractual right to stay. Drury should have exercised the contractual right to move him once that no trade clause was submitted, once the no trade teams were submitted.
Yeah. And to add
Now,
to that,
yeah,
well, yeah, just to add to that real quickly, like, let's remember that these are all guys who are being paid handsomely and will see every last dollar in their contract, right? There's $8 million coming to Jacob Trouba's way. And I understand that the familial stuff and the Rangers are known for being a top class organization. Like nobody treats their players better. So I think he probably felt betrayed to a certain extent, but this is still a business. It's Chris Drury's job to try and make the roster as good as possible. And he should have exercised whatever power and leverage he had to do that. So anyway, now current state, like you said.
yep. So current state, I don't know how much Trouba is bringing the locker room down because Trouba was playing fine. The entire team looked great for the first 2 weeks. Remember, we were
They
on
did.
the we. I don't know if we had a pod at that point because we were still, up to our eyeballs in toddler stuff. But they looked really good, and what threw the team off. I'm gonna rephrase that because it may not be accurate. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not that what threw the team off was shoehorning Ryan Lindgren back into the lineup and throwing everything into a blender within 2 games after that.
Yeah. That's a great, I mean, look, that's a great way to look at it, Dave. And I do think that, as you've pointed out, I'm sure we'll talk about this in more detail as we get into sort of what moves can the team make now, in the immediate future. But Lindgren's never been a good fit for Laviolette. His numbers tanked immediately upon Laviolette's arrival. And you know, uh, there's an argument there that he probably shouldn't be in the lineup, and that Trouba can, when he's on his game, at least contribute or not be a net negative on the ice, in this system. So points all taken. I just think that there's definitely an on ice component to it, but there's also like an off ice vibes
Yeah.
component. And I just feel like the vibes are so off. And like, when you hear Molly Walker, who, has been around the team for 5 years now, it doesn't seem like that, but this is,
It's
I think,
been
her fifth.
5 years?
Yeah, I know. She still
Wow.
seems like she's fresh out of college, but she's been around the team. Like she says, like you walk into that locker room. This is what she said on the podcast, on their podcast. Like it's weird. Like the vibe is weird. Like that. Like
Oh,
because it's been such a tight knit group, right? And obviously they've won a lot, so that helps. But the Rangers were known as like the ultimate vibes team, right? I mean, we came on this podcast how many times, and we're like, who cares what their expected goals are? Like the vibes are amazing, and they kept winning and winning and winning. And there is power in that. Like there's something to chemistry, and there's something to good energy. And right now the energy's bad. So with
yeah.
that,
No,
JL,
that's fair.
yeah, no.
That's
So,
fair.
but I think it's probably both, right? I think that's ultimately where we're ending up here. Is that certainly the lineup decisions and the ill-fitting Ryan Lindgren in this Laviolette system, like definitely has a lot to do with it. JL, I want to get your take on Trouba. I know you're someone who's been a fan of his in the past. So, what do you make of what's gone on with him over the last few months? And what do you think ultimately should be done about it?
I think this is a massive failure by both Trouba and by Drury. Drury in the sense that he overplayed his hand and basically tried to be nice, but essentially, kind of overplayed his hand too much to the point where it literally limited his ability to improve the team from last season. Now, Trouba, on the other hand, while he is still granted the contractual right to use at the resources available to him, it some reason seems like this is being done out of spite, and it's very petty because he's the captain, he's the leader of the team. He's supposed to put people straight. He's supposed to be the one that, gets everybody going. Look, I still like Jacob Trouba, and he's played, better than he did last season, which is not really saying much. But at the same time, you have to be the guy that gets everybody going in the room, regardless of whatever your situation is or not. In in real life situations, like in our jobs, just because you're dissatisfied with the way that your boss treated you doesn't mean your job performance is going to get affected by it unless your boss has really done something to kind of hinder you. Trish Drury hasn't done anything to hinder Jacob Truba. He's still getting paid. He's still on the team. He basically had to keep him, and he still gets minutes out there. He's still on the team. He's still here. So Truba has to be the one, along with the rest of this leadership group, to kind of put things together. If this is such a close knit team and you're getting paid handsomely to play in the biggest market in the country, you have to just I don't want to say, put up or shut up or like be a man or stuff like that, but you're getting paid to do a job and you have to keep things together. You can't let your personal preferences or differences get in the way of the ultimate goal. And I said this before too, I think on the last podcast or one of the past podcasts, is people pay to see them play. Madison Square Garden's a destination. People pay to see the Rangers play. And if you're not holding up your end of the bargain, you need to go. Sports is a business. And if Jacob Trouba can't get his ducks in a row and get the team together to, go to the playoffs and play well and just kind of, just be a unit, then what are you here for? Go away then if that's the case. And look, I still like Truba. I like his game. I like that he's tough and gritty, but this is something that he should be able to control. I can't fit any of this on Laviolette. I can't fit any of this on the coaching staff because it's the same group. It's the same group with the same strategies. It worked last year. This is all on the players. This is a mentally weak team. Okay. And you mentioned this before, Rob, in a couple of other podcasts. And I know Dave has mentioned this as well, too. It's a vibes team. These guys are very professional, very courteous, very low key, though. So somebody has to come in and ring them together. And if Jacob Trouba is going to be an annoying little brat about it, and I have no problem putting it that way because I do pay money to see them, my hard-earned money that it's not $8 million every year, then listen, dude, you got to get out of here. Because Mika Zibanejad isn't going to do it. Mika Zibanejad looks like he'd rather be on a DJ table. Chris Kreider's not going to do it, not that I know of, because he's just following suit. Now, if he becomes captain, that's a different story. Adam Fox certainly isn't going to do it, and his play hasn't, been top notch this year so far. Who else on the team is going to do that? It has to be your captain. Like I said, it's a mentally weak team, and Truba's not helping with that. And it also just doesn't help that, I don't know how close this is or not, but they're just lazy. It's literally almost the same team as last season. Actually, statistically should be better with Hedel being around for the majority of the time.
Yep.
You have Zach Jones on the back end, and you basically have Lindgren and or Truba playing sheltered minutes or playing with guys who can carry them to a degree. So what's wrong?
It's a great point.
You have a handful of guys on the team, who are playing well, and Trouba just has to wrangle it together. Like, get a grip, dude. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's disappointing to me, and then we'll wrap this up and move on, is like, and this is kind of what was Brian Boyle's take. Look, he's a former player, but he is kind of from a different era. I mean, we remember Brian Boyle like he was here yesterday, but it's 10 years ago. And he basically, they asked him what would be your reaction to something like the Chris Drury memo, and he basically said, like, I would look at the guy next to me and I would say, like, let's effing go. Let's prove these assholes wrong and let's show them why they shouldn't trade us. Like, and I think that was the point of the memo. Like, Drury was expecting that type of response and he's gotten the opposite. Like, they have handled it in like a very immature manner, honestly. Like, that's the only way. Like, they have this almost like entitled, like you said, JL, like bratty attitude that stems from the captain, right? Stems from the Goodrow thing. And like, again, I think it's ridiculous that is still being talked about because, again, Larry Brooks said that this came up again recently. I can only assume that he's kind of having these off the record conversations with the players about this, but like, that's ridiculous. Like, it's a business. Move on. Barkley Goodrow's fine. He's still making $3.5 million. He's in San Jose. He's taking pictures with his family on Santa's lap. He's got 2 points. By the way, that's why he was traded, because he was making $3.5 million a year, and he was good for about 8 or 9 points a year, outside of the first year or two of the contract. So a move was made, a necessary move was made to clear cap space and start to remake the team. And the players like resenting their boss for just doing regular hockey business. Like, I'm sorry, that's immature. So anyway, I don't want to harp on this too much longer.
I do want to say
yeah,
one thing,
go
though,
ahead, Dave.
because I've been trying to play devil's advocate. You can't play devil's advocate with what you just said, which is people, like, if they're going to react that way to some upsetting news or an upsetting trade or upsetting roster move, they don't belong in the NHL.
Exactly.
That's it. You don't belong in the NHL if you can't handle this crap. Everybody, every single normal person that isn't playing hockey for their career has watched friends at work get laid off while watching their company post record profits. None of us complained. None of us stopped working. We dug our heels in. We did our fucking jobs. The Rangers, if they're this butthurt over Goodrow and over the memo, then fucking retire. I don't care. If you're butthurt over that, get the fuck off this team.
100%.
Sorry, that shit pisses me off. That shit really pisses
it does.
me off.
Yeah. And because, again, we don't need to go on and on about this, but there should be a response. Like, these guys are supposed to be hyper competitive, alpha, I hate that term, but like, alpha dog type of people who basically defied the odds and said, nothing is going to stop me from becoming an NHL player. And once you're there, especially at the sort of like level the Rangers are as a team, their attitude should be, nothing is stopping us from winning the Stanley Cup. Now, they may not do it, but like, you want to see that in their attitude. You want to see that in their play. You want to know it as a fan when you watch them. And you got that sense last year. I mean, they were very businesslike, and they played the game with tremendous structure, and they played a very, disciplined, hard-edged, brand of hockey that also let their skill show out. Like, it was a really fun team to watch last year. And as JL said, it's the same team with a healthy Filipino and with Zach Jones, who's been quite good, and adding a little bit of that puck moving that they were missing on the back end last year.
And an actual fourth line. They have a fourth line this year.
Exactly. Sam Carrick's an upgrade over Goodrow. Like, this team should be better. And it was better for the first 6-7 games of the year, like you said, Dave. And that's what it should have been all year. But it went off the rails, and again, maybe it was Lindgren, maybe it was whatever it was, but now it feels like it is like very close to being irreparably harmed. And so something needs to be done. So let's transition to that, Dave. You put a call out to, your following on Blue Sky, your burgeoning Blue Sky following, and basically said, like, I want you to read the prompt, because I think it's a really good prompt, and then we'll dig into some of the answers.
So what I put out on Blue Sky, and again, a reminder, I know I am 100% on Blue Sky. I am not on Twitter. Rob, I believe you're the same. I think most of the staff is kind of hybrid for now, but Blue Sky is where we're at. Follow us on Blue Sky. What I put out there was, it's been a tough few weeks for Rangers fans. While we know there isn't a quote-unquote one fix to this team, what's the first thing you would do if you were Chris Drury? And this was put out on the 3rd, so this is Tuesday.
Okay.
So the first one that I thought was interesting, because it came from multiple people, was fire Phil Housley, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. People saying that the defense system sucks or anything like that don't quite grasp that this is a basic system. This is very basic. The Rangers run with their defensive zone coverage. It's man coverage below the dots, shift to zone when release to zone when the puck is above the dots. It's not that hard. Most coaches run this.
Yes.
There
And
was a
even
point on Monday when I saw Keandre Miller at the blue line. And it's not just him. I'm not singling out Miller. They're just not paying attention. That's a basic hockey fundamental. Release at the dots. That's it.
100%. And even if you want to extend this to the 1-3-1, right? Which, like, fair, that's a bad fit for Lindgren. That's a lot of ice to cover for, for the left defenseman who's supposed to be very active. Um, then fine. Like, you need more mobile defensemen. Guess what? It's the NHL. Like, it's the modern NHL. Every team has a defense that can move, that can join the rush, that can be aggressive at the lines and step up and keep plays alive. That's how you evaluate players, right? And that is on, Drury and Laviolette to have a symbiotic relationship and say, okay, guys, like, we love Lindgren. We love what he brings intangibly. Like, yes, he's a good penalty killer. Like, yes, he's been a good compliment to Fox over the first, 4 or 5 years of his career. But, like, it's not going to work in this system. There's enough evidence, and maybe we need to move on. And so I will say that is on the coaching and GM tandem to sort of make those calls, recognize those things. But look, I couldn't believe you. I couldn't, sorry, agree with you anymore, Dave. And, like, I think that, frankly, I don't take any call for the coaches' heads or changes to the staff seriously. I just don't take any of that stuff seriously.
Nope.
I think that you have to give this coach and his staff, which when, by the way, when he hired all of these coaches, these assistants, I believe we came on this podcast and some words may have been written on Blue Seat blogs that this is one of the most encouraging, high quality Ranger staffs that's ever been assembled. Right.
Yeah.
With young minds and sort of diverse backgrounds, Dan Muse and as an up and coming kind of like potential head coach, Michael Pekka, who has had some great experience and clearly had a strong influence on the centers, particularly last season. Again, like, Laviolette's such a strong personality too that, like, I don't think firing Phil Housley does anything because, like, it's still Laviolette's system. It's just Housley's just there to do, like, individual coaching and to run the bench during games. So, like, I think that's completely asinine. Yeah, JL, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, it just my exasperation should tell it all. But no, like I said, you can't fire the coach for what? What is that going to do? And I might have missed what you were talking about Lindgren previously, so just kind of fill me in on that. But
well, just like, I mean, basically that people are calling for Phil Housley to be replaced. Like, that's one thing, like, one immediate move that the Rangers could make, and, like, I just dovetailed that with, like, them needing better personnel. It's a personnel thing.
It's right. It's only a personnel thing. Lindgren, you mentioned it before, and it's glaringly obvious. And when Adam Fox can't carry him, then clearly it's become an issue. And like Dave said, there's really there's not. It's sort of a coincidence that all of a sudden he comes back into the lineup, and I think it was against Florida, if I'm remembering that correctly. I could be wrong, but when he came back into the lineup. And around that same time, they played Florida. That's when everything kind of started to go on a nosedive, so to speak. And the problem is it's not the coaches. I unfortunately am still on Twitter, and I have seen some of it on Blue Sky. Calling for Peter Laviolette to be fired does nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
It actually, honestly, if you fire Peter Laviolette, you are doing the same thing Woody Johnson did with Robert Saleh. Did I like Robert Saleh as the Jets head coach? I did not. But there clearly was a hierarchy and, division of responsibilities that, with just the right amount of patience or even just some fine tuning could have maybe have gotten you 7-6 wins. Probably wasn't going to be the Super Bowl year that everybody thought. But clearly, Woody Johnson does not have the pulse. And now look at the Jets now. They're a tire fire, which they always are, but they just somehow managed to take what they did good, just worse. And I relay that here because firing Laviolette, firing Phil Housley for what? It's not the coach's fault that the players are not skating on the ice. It's not Phil Housley's fault that Keandre Miller doesn't know what defensive coverage to go in, and then he's playing at the point, leaving his man open in front of the net. It's not Michael Pekka's fault that Mika Zibanejad has an awful turnover and has Braden Shen go the other way without any hustle going back and leaving his teammates flat-footed. So firing the coach would just make the malaise even worse. Or firing Phil Housley will make the malaise even worse because now you're sowing tension on the staff. And then when they're not checked in and the players are not checked in, well, you're basically going to be out of the playoffs by January.
Yeah. And frankly, it's as simple as this for me. Like, this core doesn't deserve a fourth coach, right? Most of them were around for David Quinn, then Gerard Gallant, now Peter Laviolette. Like, they don't deserve a fourth coach. You've had three different approaches. You've had sort of the younger guy who was kind of edgy and hard on them. You had Gallant, who let them do whatever the hell they wanted. Now I think you've got a really nice mix with Laviolette where he's demanding, but he's also a good communicator. He's kind of got like an elder, I shouldn't say elderly because he's not an old guy, but like almost like a elder professorial approach, right? He's like a little bit Tom Rennie-ish in that regard. I mean, look, I love Laviolette because he knows the game. Like, he doesn't get up there, and he wasn't getting up there, and this endeared him to me even more when they were playing poorly but getting bailed out by their goalies. He wasn't getting up there and saying the way Gallant used to say, like, well, 2 points is 2 points, and we're not going to apologize for wins and blah, 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 blah. Like, he'd say, no, we played poorly, and we're lucky we have the goaltending we have. We didn't deserve to win, basically. He's realistic about how the team is playing at even strength, especially. And look, would I like for him to like do more to get it back to a place where it is acceptable? Yes, I think he does play a part here, and that he probably does need to rattle some cages and wake some people up. But like, firing him does nothing. This core doesn't deserve another coach. So, anything else on the coaching staff, Dave, or do you want to move on to another response?
Let's go on to another response, but I do think it's funny how there were 11 replies, a couple of quote tweets about on this, and like half of them are coaching related. I got one here that says, fire whoever is responsible for that hybrid man-on-man system that none of the D is capable of playing outside of Schneider and Jones, conveniently leaving out Fox. And then fire Lavy or Housley, doesn't matter. But like, this is a basic system.
Yeah, and again, like, it's easy to target the coach, and you do see teams get the new coach bump, right? And sometimes the new coach bump lasts like a week, like it did with Boston, and then they were kind of back to losing a bunch of games again. Look, if you can really upgrade the way St. Louis did, okay. But to me, the only way that's possible for the Rangers is if Mike Sullivan becomes available. And I don't think the Penguins are going to fire him mid-season. Yeah, maybe it's possible. I think that's more of an off-season thing. And Laviolette's only on a 3-year deal anyway. So
yeah,
at that, you have that discussion at the end of the season here. Like, I think Laviolette certainly deserves at least the rest of this season to get this thing back on track, potentially with a tweaked roster.
So the next one is personnel related. Both are things that are interesting. One is not happening. The other is something we spoke about. One guy said, waive Lindgren, not happening. They're going to trade him. Mm-hmm. He's got value. He will be traded. And that's not a he's probably going to, no, he's going to get traded at some point this season. The second one is waive Trouba and Lindgren. If neither get claimed, send one to Hartford. The other becomes the seventh defenseman. Call up Mancini. Not a fix, but it's a start. I don't necessarily agree with that, but a lot of this depends on what Drury is planning on doing with the roster. If he's trying to retool for this season, that doesn't necessarily work. If he's trying to just get as much value as possible and just punt this season and try again next season, then that may work because you get Mancini some NHL time, and then maybe you have a little bit of time to figure out, you're not going to be able to trade Trouba, but maybe with Lindgren sitting, maybe somebody takes some things like that. I don't know.
Well, so let me just comment on it from the standpoint that, like, I agree with it in principle that those two players need to be solved for. And now what I mean by that is not necessarily like cut both of them, even though, like, because that's just not realistic. It's not the way teams operate. And again, I don't know how the cap works. I know that there is kind of like a buried in Hartford charge that would still sit on the cap. There's also like the remote but real possibility that like neither of them would report, at which case you could like potentially suspend them, and then you might not. I don't know. There's a lot of iterations of that, but I believe that one of them needs to be off the roster completely, and the other needs to have his playing time significantly cut, if not, serve as the seventh defenseman. Like, because I do think that for all the things, same reasons we stated earlier, right? The Trouba thing is just beyond repair. He's a lame duck captain. He's bringing a generally poor attitude into the room. He's wearing the C. It's a bad mix. It needs to be fixed. Lindgren is a bad fit for the system. It's just, he cannot skate at the level that is needed to play aggressively at both blue lines, to, be the sort of like the left side guy in a 1-3-1. He should not have no problems with the D zone coverage. Like you keep saying, Dave, it is pretty basic and doesn't necessarily demand like a hugely mobile defense. Like as long as you're an average skater, you should be able to do it. Like keep yourself between your guy and the net. Like it's really not that hard in theory, but yeah, I mean, I think that to me, I like that as a starting point because, and frankly, like I was hoping that like we would maybe get the shock like Jacob Trouba has been like put on waivers news on Tuesday, because like Monday was that bad and like that would have been quite impulsive, but it also would have been like at least defensible if the Rangers did that. Now obviously they didn't, but it's clear that and as more stuff is coming out, whether it's Friedman, whether it's whoever else is reporting, like Emily Kaplan, conversations are happening. Like Drury is gauging interest in pretty much everybody on his roster. And I agree with you, Dave. I think Lindgren will get traded, and I think you could probably and let me ask you this: like, what could they get for Ryan Lindgren? Like, what's a reasonable return potentially?
He's a pending unrestricted free agent. Doesn't put up points. I mean, Ben Sherratt got a first. I don't think Lindgren gets a first. I think he gets a second. The Rangers need draft picks. I mean, I'll take a second round pick for Lindgren.
Yeah, I would too. But there has to be a corresponding move. I think you still probably have to import, a breath of fresh air type player. I don't know who that might be. JL, do you have any thoughts on that one, on the Lindgren Trouba thing? I mean, we've talked about both those guys a lot already.
I think Lindgren gets dealt. Trouba's going to probably last the season unless someone really wants to take that on. I mean, I'm sure there are teams out there that'd be willing to take that. I mean, we've gone through so many different scenarios in terms of where he could fit. Also, I also think that when you talk about Lindgren not being a fit for the system, honestly, even though he should be, I don't think Mika Zibanejad is the fit for the system. Honestly, by looking at the way it's structured, now granted, I don't want to seem like I'm just picking on Mika because, everybody's playing poorly. Vincent Trocheck's been underwhelming. Lots of players have been underwhelming. Adam Fox has been nothing short of a disappointment. Keandre Miller, disappointment. But the reason why I'm mentioning Mika is because he's making the most money and probably the most unmovable contract. But you really want to fix this issue, you trade him. Because then what you can do is you can have the space to get someone who can fit the system. And it's no indictment on Mika. It just doesn't work. And whatever he's going through, whatever he's dealing with, it just doesn't seem to be a good fit. All the other players can probably shoehorn their way in somehow, as evident of last season. But the main thing that's been consistent is just Mika has been underperforming in this system. And it kills me because I really like the skill set that Mika Zibanejad can bring, because he can be a first line center. Now, whether there's internal or external factors that are causing this, that remains to be seen. I don't want to jump the gun. But if it's purely just the fact that he does not play well and there are no other factors that are playing into this, then you clearly have to find a way to get rid of him somehow. And I know that contract is unmovable, but I mean, if Ryan Lindgren has value, if Cody McLeod can net you a 7th round pick, I'm sure somebody will be willing to bite on Zibanejad at some point, whether it's this summer or even right now. Now, we kind of talk a lot in the chat about, you know, a lot of people in the chat like to mention, the groundbreaking trade, but the Rangers don't have the luxury of having a player like Matthew Tkachuk being available with also the other side of that deal also looking to get out at the same time. Those types of trades really have to have all of the factors come into play, because you don't see trades like that, especially in the NHL.
Yeah.
You don't see trades like that happen very often. Like the
No.
only trade that I can honestly think of that's honestly similar to that on a bigger scale was when Eric Lindros was traded to Philadelphia for Peter Forsberg, and clearly there was just tit for tat, just players who would complement each other. And honestly, both teams ended up coming out pretty well in that deal. But there's nothing like that out there for New York right now. Like who's gonna take the spot of Huberdeau? Who's gonna be the spot of Mackenzie Weegar? Or who's gonna be this person? Who's gonna be that person? Well, you're gonna have to give up a pretty decent amount of your team if that's the case. You know, do the
Yeah,
Rangers have the stuff to supplement it? Who knows? But that's honestly the only way that this
There
could
is
really kind
nobody
of help
like
the
that
team.
available. That's the
no,
thing. We
Right.
can talk about this all the time. Matthew Tkachuk was a unicorn trade.
yes,
Those things don't come around. He just happened to be available at the peak of his career with the team that he wasn't going to re-sign with, and Florida just happened to be in the situation they were in where they needed something. Those trades happen once a decade, if that.
yeah, and
There's nobody like that available right now.
yeah, I am guilty of this too, and I'll be first to admit it. Like that, and I think, and that's the thing, right? Like, so granted that trade doesn't exist. Although I will say this, right? And again, different era, and maybe I'm looking at it with slightly rose-colored glasses, but I do think that a similar move was made by the Rangers, a generation ago for Sean Avery. I think that team was, kind of sleepwalking through the first half of the year. They were a veteran team. They were okay. Um, they knew they needed a little bit of a jolt, and they went out and got Avery. And now look, Avery became, frankly, one of the most famous hockey players for good reasons or bad. That's, it doesn't really matter. Like he wasn't, and that was only after he came to the Rangers, right? I mean, look, he had a couple of like incidents and he was known as a pest, but like he really became like Sean Avery, the Sean Avery that everybody knows after he was traded to the Rangers. So like they went out and they found a guy that, did not have great box score stats, but frankly was a very good hockey player. I mean, again, and I've said this before on this podcast, and you can go look. This stuff is on Hockey Reference now. Like his Corsi was good. We didn't really have expected goals, at least until the latter part of his career, but like his shot attempt numbers were great. He was always in the offensive zone. He was an extremely smart hockey player. He had pretty good rate stats because he didn't play a ton of minutes, but he put up a decent amount of points. He was over half a point per game in a couple of the seasons that he played as a Ranger. Now, look, we know that it was a bad fit with Torts. We know he went overboard with some of his antics, but he shook that team up, and that team swept Atlanta and like had a really good chance to go to a conference final. They lost to Buffalo, obviously, in the next round, but like, yeah, I do think that sure, there's no Matthew Tkachuk available. That he's a top 5% in the league player, top 3% in the league player, and he also kind of brings that brash approach. But there probably is like who is the next Sean Avery, and I don't need the antics. I don't need like the frankly like potentially untenable stuff that he brought with him, but like they do need a jolt. Like they need new personalities in this room. Like I don't know. I can only say it so many times. Like somebody needs to come in and breathe some life into the team from outside the organization. I mean, frankly, like Brett Berard did it a little bit. Like he added some speed. I think his line mates reacted well to him, but that's not enough, right? Like calling up a kid from Hartford is not enough. Calling up Matt Rempe for 3 games is not enough. Like there needs to be a presence coming into this room that changes the mix. And is going to be around and is going to potentially contribute. So, yeah, Dave, I don't know if you have any other responses, but I just wanted to get that in, in light of the sort of Kachuk comparison.
So the only other one that is not in the same vein as everything else we've spoken about is trade Igor.
Okay.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I
honestly don't know. I don't have an answer.
So I'll go first, and then I'd love to hear JL's thoughts on this. It is not the worst idea I've heard. That's what I'll say. And I think a lot of people will think I'm crazy. But I think you're looking at the prospect of having to pay him $13 million a year. I think you're looking at the prospect of like a very ugly negotiation, a la, maybe a little bit like Lundqvist, although that didn't really go too badly. It did hinder his play until it got done. but we've seen this happen with like high profile New York athletes before. Derek Jeter comes to mind. This could get played out in the public. It could get really ugly. And then you leave yourself a situation where it's Henrik Lundqvist 2.0, where you keep getting to the second round of the playoffs and the conference final. Maybe you get to one cup final, but the cast around him is not good enough because the cap hits high. And I don't know where I fall on this debate, because and the reason it's a true debate is that there's good arguments on both sides. Like, there are just too many examples of, frankly, like mid-level goalies going apeshit and like making a crazy run. But also, like, I think it's more, and I think the more plausible route is like and I know Bobrovsky makes a lot of money, but like, Bobrovsky, Jonathan Quick, like these guys are good goalies, but like we know from looking at Jonathan Quick's, goals saved above expected, like he wasn't at the level of Lundqvist and Price. Like, he was top 5, he was maybe top 10 or top 12 in some of his down years, but he was money in the playoffs, right? So he got hot at the right time, and he's known for making like acrobatic saves in big spots, and now he's going to break records because of longevity, but like, he was never like the best goalie every single year the way Lundqvist was, or the way Carey Price was. And I think the Rangers also have an organizational superpower, even with Benoit Allaire slightly stepping away or into a more like nebulous, less day-to-day role. They have an organizational superpower where they draft and develop goaltending really well. And I think it may not be, because look, this would be a huge risk. The easiest thing for Chris Drury to do is pay Igor Shesterkin. Nobody will ever second guess that. The risky and potentially higher reward, the riskier and higher reward approach would be to say, you know what? This guy can fetch me a star player and probably a first round pick. Like, I mean, what would a package, and this is where I know you've said this, Dave, like the packages for goalies are all over the place, but like, it's pretty much.
Oh, I got a team. Oh, I got one.
Please do. Please go, because I you see where I'm going with this. Like, I would do it for the right deal is what I'll say.
Colorado.
Yeah.
Colorado. They are a very well-run team. Injuries have plagued them. They have the cap space to take on Shesterkin's $5 million now.
Yeah.
Georgiev is awful. I don't know what the hell happened to him. He was fine. He was serviceable, but he
was fine, and he won a cup. Right, this is what I'm saying, right? And he won the cup on a $5 million contract or whatever he's making, not 13. What Igor's going to make next year.
So, if you're going Colorado, Callum Ritchie is the prize.
Is he NHL ready?
I don't believe so. Let me double check that.
This is the hard part with this, is that, like,
before we get to Callum Richards, I got to look it up. Dylan Garand in the AHL right now is a .910 save percentage in 10 games.
And he was great in the playoffs last year for them.
Yes.
I think, wasn't he?
They're not. I can't. Oh, Callum Ritchie is still in the OHL, by the way.
Okay. So he's still a year or two away.
He's also got 34 points in 16 games in the OHL as a 19-year-old.
I have no doubt he's going to be good, but I think my concern is, like, I don't want to punt on. I don't want to punt on this year, but yeah.
Yeah. So that is something to look at if they trade Shesterkin. I think Colorado will be interested in most of what the Rangers are quote unquote offering. They need somebody to replace Landeskog. Kreider is the guy. They have a bunch of high-priced defensemen that I don't know what they're going to do with. Sam Girard might be an interesting guy to go after.
Or Devon Taves.
I don't know if the Rangers can eat that $7 million that he has. Let me just double check that salary.
By the way, while you're doing that, here's Dylan Garand's playoff stats. 17 games played, .927 save percentage across 2 seasons.
Wow.
10-7. So raising his game in the playoffs. His regular season, numbers aren't great, but also this is, Steve Valiquette talks about this a lot, right? And the Rangers are very good at this. They don't rush their goalie prospects. He's played, between regular season and playoffs, he's played just about 100 games, 80 through regular season, 17 playoffs. You probably want him to do another full season in Hartford, but he probably is ready next year. Because you want them to have 150 to 200 games in the minors. That's Valaket says that all the time when he's talking about goalie development.
So you finish this season out. He's got another 40 games. That puts him at, you said he's at 100 games, 150 games now?
Yep.
So that puts him right around there. So yeah, midseason call up next year is probably the earliest.
Right.
So Devon Taves is in year one he is 30 years old. He's in year one of a 7-year contract.
Yeah.
With a $7.25 million cap hit. Hard pass.
Yeah, hard pass.
On Devon Taves.
Didn't realize he was 30 either.
Yeah, I didn't think he was 30 either. Feels like it was yesterday that he got traded from the Islanders for peanuts. Sam Girard plays both left and right. 2 years left after this at $5 million, and he's 26.
Yeah, that would be much better.
I would prefer that, but I don't know if Colorado's would be willing to do something like that unless it's for a Kreider or something like that. I think this has the potential to be a solid match.
Yeah. JL, would you trade Shesterkin or are we completely crazy?
No, you guys are not crazy at all, because it's definitely something to think about. Nobody is untouchable on this team. If, the old adage is, if Wayne Gretzky can get traded, anybody can get traded.
But it is true.
But
it's true.
It's true. But my thing, though, is also, how confident are the Rangers with Dylan Garand? Now, you said they don't want to rush their goalie prospects. That's perfectly fine. On the other end of things, unless there is this drastic sort of reconstruction of the way this team plays, it doesn't matter what happens. Even if you just get rid of a guy like Trouba, or guys like Trouba and Lindgren, the team is still probably going to be sort of the same. Now, unless there is either a change in coaching, or at least the strategy, or just a really drastic change in personnel, this team is going to hemorrhage shots, and the goalie is a big part of that. This team, and I'm almost positive going forward, this team will always have to rely on a steady goaltender. Now, the cap is going up, and I don't think Igor's going to get 13. I think that's asinine. I don't think anyone is really going to want to pay that either. There was a number Kevin Weeks was floating out, was 11.5, which is fine.
Well, then it should be done. That's my point. I think it would be done if it was 11.5, and I think we expected it to be done if it was 11.5. I think he wants at least 12 or 12 and a quarter.
Right. But also at the same time, I think he just has to stop being stubborn, or his camp has to stop being stubborn. Because if you think the New York Rangers are not going to pay you that, what other team can you think outside of Colorado? And even they might not want to do it too, because again, like Dave said, they have some pieces they have to replace. Trying to find a replacement for Gabriel Landeskog is not going to be cheap. And if they can find a way to try to fix Georgiev in some way, because there is still some talent there, I feel like that would probably be the better option than, blowing a bunch of money on a goaltender that you might not even know might play well. Now, that's not to take anything away from Igor, because he is a phenomenal goaltender. I mean, all world, really. But at the same time, Igor should be a priority here. If he's making 11.5, making $12 million, do it. Because look, Jonathan Quick is only getting older, and you want Dylan Garand to come in and be the backup, fine. Then if you're able to secure Igor on a contract, and then things go wrong, and you have Garand with some experience here already, you have security in having Igor, but then also you have Garand as your backup. You want to trade Igor because you can't really hold the cap anymore? Somebody's going to want to take that deal at some point. You'd be crazy not to, But I don't think it's very productive. I mean, logically speaking, trading him instead of giving him $13 million. I wouldn't give him 13. I think he's probably going to budget around 11.5, maybe 12. I don't think it's going to go any higher than that. But with the way the cap is going up, and if the Rangers really want to capitalize on this window, because the window is still open, contrary to what many people think, this is still a very talented team with a lot of talent inside this organization. They will figure it out. There's no problem with that. As crazy as Chris Drury might be, and maybe he might not even be the guy, there's still a lot of competent people in this organization. And I think that they are probably a lot better off having that goalie on their side than just kind of wasting it away. Because then you look at all these rebuilds that go on. Buffalo is finally good after what, 13 years after rebuilding. Edmonton finally figured it out, just finally over the last 2-3 years.
Tell you what, Buffalo's not having that great of. They're 11,
Buffalo's
12,
not
and 2.
that good.
They're 11, 12,
Right.
and 2. They have a negative goal differential. So and you're right, they've been rebuilding for 10 years, 12 years.
Right. And that's not something that that's going to happen again unless they're the reason why, and I apologize if I'm going on a tangent here, but it's all circular somehow. Unless, see, this core players didn't have the same luxury that the previous core had. By the time that last core had their last hurrah, we had a bunch of good moments, like years worth consistently. It's only been 2.5 seasons of really enjoyable hockey with this core. It's not as it maybe 3 pushing it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. 3's about right.
So 3 years of just having decent, runs, it's not enough. And this core, trading away Igor doesn't exactly keep the window open. They're still very talented. They still have a lot of potential. They just need to move some stuff around. Now, does that mean keeping Igor to a higher amount? Yeah, but your bank on the cap going up. An 11, maybe $12 million goalie might be a $10 million goalie or an $8 million goalie a couple of years ago. So as logical as it is, it's not as bad as it seems, but it's also not great. You could be in a far worse situation right now if the New York Rangers. But all of the problems that are currently on this team right now are fixable. It's not impossible. And trading away Igor or not allowing Igor to be your guy is not one of those. That's honestly the least of the concerns of this team right now. You want to get him signed and you want to keep him here. Have him be the mainstay. Probably the contract negotiations are probably what's throwing him off. He's trying way too much because he wants to make sure that the numbers reflect what his contract should be. Happens to everybody. Happened to Lundqvist. But at the end of the day, you need to have that stability on the back end. And if you're a good organization, you can build and draft and find pieces that can complement that, whether it's at a certain price or not. You already have good players at the contracts that you want them. You can find other pieces to complement that slowly.
I will say that I think my only counterpoint is that I don't think, and I will agree that I don't want the window to close, and I think they need to keep this window open. And I think what we're talking about is a retool, and that's why, like, when Dave brings up Callum Ritchie, is that his name?
Yeah.
I'm like, if he's 2-3 years away, I'm not interested in that. Like, I want their best young NHL ready player now, or whatever, So, and again, this is why these trades are hard to make. This is why, like, us getting on the internet and screaming at Chris Drury to make a move, like, it's easier said than done. My only counterpoint to that, JL, would be that, like, this team has been so goaltending driven for the last 2 cycles or 2 generations, if you want to call it that I think it is kind of ingrained in their culture that, like, oh, it's okay if we hemorrhage shots because we have the goalie. Like, it's okay if we give up a lot of chances. We have the goalie. Like, it might actually cause, like, the mental shift that is needed if there isn't such a sure thing all world goalie and net behind them. That might be a huge risk to take. But like I said earlier, I also trust their drafting and development, team to bring up the next guy. And maybe it's not Garand or Garand, however you say his name. Like, maybe they just go get, like, a free agent goalie, or they make a corresponding trade to bring in, like, a middle sort of average NHL starter, or a guy like what they did with Antti Ranta or Halak, or who was the other backup they had? They had Andre Pavlik one year. Like, they brought in all these guys. So, like, oh, all right, whatever. This guy had like an 889 save percentage last year, and his save percentage went up to 910 as a Ranger. Like, this is like, this happens all the time. It's been repeated and over again by the organization. So, like, it's their superpower. Like, I don't think it gets talked about enough. Like, they are a goaltending factory. They have been for most of our existence. Like, going back to Van Beesbrook and Richter, There was one little lull there where Richter was hurt, where they didn't really have a solution. Other than that, they've had nothing but top 3 goaltending for 40 years. So, like, to me, I'm not worried. It sounds weird to say, but like, if they trade Igor, I'm not worried. And I think they'd figure out a replacement and they'd be able to do it fast. So, all right, we're pretty much done. I want to wrap it up because we're at like an hour now. But one last thing I want to do very quick. I want one word responses from you guys because there have been some names that have been thrown at me in group chats and stuff. I want to toss them to you. I want to hear yes or no on your interest. Let's kick it back to the first one. Dave first. Yes or no on Brad Marchand?
Yes.
JL?
Yes.
Okay. How about JT Miller?
No.
His name has been floated.
Only reason why no is for that. I know. Sorry, one more answer. Contract.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Contract.
JL?
You know what? I know one word responses. I'm just saying in the past I would have said no, but now I'm saying yes.
I think it definitely changes the vibe, but I also think he's a punk. I'm leaning no, but it might be what they need. Steven Stamkos has been floated.
When was Stamkos? I'm sorry. Wait, when was Stamkos floated?
I think in one of Larry Brooks's articles. This is very poorly sourced, but it did come through on a group chat as we were recording. Look, I mean, people are just sort of spitballing here, but Nashville's a disaster, right? They handed out all that money to Stamkos, Brady Shea, and Marchessault, huge contracts. The team stinks. Trotz is on record saying he wants to change it up, that he realizes he made some pretty big mistakes in the offseason. So the Rangers have been wanting Steven Stamkos for 12 years. So here's your chance. Yes or no?
No. Contract.
JL?
Yes. 100% yes.
Yeah, I'm a yes too.
He doesn't play center anymore, guys. He's only a winger.
That's fine. They need a winger. Like, I don't care. And I would move whatever needs to be moved to get him.
He can play with Capo Caco. That's fine with me.
Fair enough. Still no. Anything that carries money into into the summer of 2026 when Eichel and McDavid hit free agency is a hard pass.
But well, good point, Dave. And by the way, that's why I think there is at least a slight chance they trade Igor, because you could very easily go to James Dolan and say, hey, look, I believe in Benny Allaire and the goaltending apparatus here. We'll get by with a decent starter, a league average starter. We'll still be competitive, and then we can sign McDavid or Eichel. So, and not having $13 million on the books helps us do that. Like, we could give them like a record-breaking hockey offer. We could make them the first like $20 million hockey player, which I think they should be trying to do. All right, guys, this was a great show. Hopefully next week's episode will feature a little more talk about like winning games and maybe a return of
games. You're funny.
You're fun. It is fun. It is like fun.
No, I'm Mr. Optimist, so I'm with him on that.
No, I want them to win. I think we all want them to win, and I don't want this.
We all want them to win. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I know, but it is hard to see the way they've been playing lately. Want to thank everybody for listening. Follow the pod on Blue Sky. We are also still on Twitter as well. JL is kind of holding down the fort there. Submit questions. Give us your hot takes, responses to any of Dave's good, bad, or otherwise strange questions and prompts. And we look forward to talking to you next week.